His name was Esteban Rocha. Unlike Rafael, Esteban had never wanted the spotlight. He operated quietly, managing key distribution routes along the coast, particularly through Cartagena. While Rafael ruled the interior, Esteban controlled access to the outside world, and now, with Rafael gone, Esteban saw an opportunity not to replace him, but to expand. Tomás underestimated him at first, not out of arrogance, but because Esteban didn't fit the pattern. He didn't strike openly. He didn't challenge directly. Instead, shipments began disappearing again, but this time they weren't destroyed. They were rerouted. Profits shifted. Alliances quietly adjusted. It wasn't an attack. It was a takeover, disguised as cooperation. By the time Tomás realized what was happening, Esteban had already secured influence over several key ports. And unlike Rafael's old structure, Esteban's network wasn't built on fear or visibility. It was built on mutual benefit. He offered stability without demanding loyalty, and people responded to that. Tomás found himself in a position he hadn't anticipated, defending a throne he hadn't even fully claimed yet. And worse, he was starting to see the same cracks in his own system that he had exploited in Rafael's. The difference was, now he was the one responsible for holding it together. Meanwhile, Valeria had already begun adapting. She reached out to Esteban first. Not to side with him, but to understand him. Their meeting took place in Cartagena, far from the chaos of Medellín, in a quiet, luxurious setting overlooking the ocean. Esteban wasn't what most people expected. He was calm, composed, almost understated. Dangerous in a different way. You backed the right man, he told her, pouring a drink with steady hands. But not the final one. Valeria smiled slightly. I don't back people, she said. I invest in outcomes. Esteban nodded, as if he expected that answer. Then you already know, he said. This isn't over. Back in Medellín, Tomás made his move, not with violence, but with structure. He began reorganizing the territories, cutting out unnecessary layers, removing inefficient operators. He wasn't trying to inspire loyalty, he was enforcing order. And for a moment, it worked. The chaos slowed. The system began to stabilize. But stability came at a cost. The more control Tomás exerted, the more he started to resemble the very thing he had destroyed, and he knew it. Late one night, standing alone in the same penthouse Rafael once occupied, Tomás looked out over the city again. The view hadn't changed. The power hadn't changed. Only the man holding it had. And that realization unsettled him more than anything else. Because deep down, he had believed he was different, better. But power didn't change the system, it revealed it. The next strike came without warning. One of Tomás's key financial hubs was wiped out, not burned, not attacked, but emptied. Clean, precise, professional. No trace, no noise, just gone. And this time, there was no symbol left behind, no message. Because the message was clear enough. Esteban wasn't trying to challenge Tomás. He was replacing him. Tomás reacted quickly, tracing what little he could, but Esteban had anticipated every move. It wasn't a direct war, it was displacement. Strategic, controlled, almost surgical. And the more Tomás pushed back, the more he exposed the weaknesses in his own system. Frustration started to creep in, not the reckless kind Bruno had, but something colder, more focused. Tomás realized something critical in that moment. He had spent years preparing to take down Rafael, but he hadn't prepared for what came after. He had been fighting a past version of power while Esteban was building a future one. And Valeria, she'd seen it all along. When Tomás confronted her again, this time in person, there was no pretense left. You knew, he said, his voice steady but sharp. Valeria didn't deny it. I anticipated, she corrected. There's a difference. Tomás stepped closer. You set this up. She shook her head slightly. No, I created conditions. What people do within those conditions, that's their choice. Tomás stared at her, trying to decide if she was an ally, an enemy, or something else entirely. Then tell me, he said, who wins? Valeria met his gaze without hesitation. The one who understands that this isn't about winning, she said. It's about staying. That answer stayed with him longer than he expected, because for the first time, Tomás began to question whether he had been playing the wrong game all along. The streets didn't care about revenge. The system didn't care about ideals. Power didn't reward intention. It rewarded adaptability. And right now, Esteban Rocha was adapting faster. The war hadn't ended on that rooftop. It had only changed form. And somewhere between the shadows of Medellin, the ports of Cartagena, and the silent calculations of Bogotá, a new balance was forming, one that would decide not just who ruled the city, but what kind of power would define it. Tomás exhaled slowly, looking out over the city one more time. This time, he didn't see something to conquer. He saw something he might lose. Tomás stopped thinking like a conqueror the night the war came back to him in a way he couldn't calculate. It didn't start with a shipment or a territory. It started with a name. Sofia. His sister had stayed far from everything, hidden, untouched by the empire he built and the one he destroyed. He had promised himself she would never be part of this world. That promise died the moment Esteban decided to stop playing from a distance. They found her in Bogotá. Not dead, worse. Alive, shaken, used as a message. No threats, no demands. Just a quiet reminder carved into reality. No one stands above the system. Not even the man trying to rewrite it. Something inside Tomás cracked, not loudly, not violently, but completely. For the first time since he started this war, he abandoned patience. Strategy blurred into instinct. He didn't care about structure anymore. He didn't care about rebuilding anything. He wanted it to end. The retaliation was immediate and brutal. Medellin lit up like it hadn't in years. Gunfire echoed through narrow streets. Safe houses turned into graves. Alliances shattered overnight. Tomás didn't lead like before. He tore through everything in his path, dismantling Esteban's operations with a precision that looked like chaos from the outside. And Esteban responded in kind. Cartagena burned next. The ports, once silent arteries of power, became open battlegrounds. Ships were destroyed before they docked. Entire crews vanished into the ocean, and the city's golden coast turned into a reflection of fire and smoke. The war wasn't hidden anymore. It wasn't controlled. It was everywhere. And Valeria watched it all fall apart. For the first time, even she couldn't control the outcome. She had built the system on balance, on calculated tension, on the idea that no one would push too far. But grief doesn't follow rules. And Tomás had nothing left anchoring him to reason. When the final confrontation came, it wasn't arranged. It wasn't clean. It happened because there was nowhere left for either of them to go, an abandoned shipping yard on the edge of Cartagena. Night. No witnesses. No audience. Just two men who had turned a country into a battlefield. Esteban stood calm as ever, even then. This wasn't necessary, he said, almost quietly. Tomás didn't answer. His eyes were empty, not of emotion, but of everything else. You could have built something lasting, Esteban continued. Instead, you chose this. Tomás finally spoke, his voice low, broken in a way that couldn't be fixed. You took the only thing that wasn't part of the game. For a moment, there was silence. Then the gunfire started. It wasn't long. It wasn't dramatic. It was messy, close, desperate. Two men firing not for power anymore, but because there was nothing left to lose. When it ended, both of them were still standing. Barely. Tomás moved first, staggering forward, gripping Esteban by the collar, as blood soaked through both of them. For a second, it looked like he might say something, But there were no words left that mattered. The final shot came between them. Neither of them stepped back, and then they both fell. By morning, the city didn't pause. Medellin moved on. Bogotá adjusted. Cartagena rebuilt. The war ended not with a victor, but with an absence. The system reshaped itself the way it always did, filling the void with new names, new faces, new ambitions. Sofia disappeared completely after that. Some said she left the country. Others said she never recovered. No one really knew. And in the end, no one looked too hard. Valeria stood once again behind glass, watching a different skyline, untouched but not unchanged. For the first time, there was no satisfaction in her expression, only quiet understanding. She had always believed power was something you could control. But power wasn't a system, it was a cycle. And cycles don't end. They just wait for the next person desperate enough to start them again. Somewhere in the city, a young boy watched the streets the same way Tomás once did, learning, waiting, and the silence began all over again.